Thank you so much for coming for the discussion. I think we'll start now. My name is Valleria Schiller. I'm one of the curators of the exhibition, The Artist as Prophet, which is right now on view on the first floor of Galerie Weisser Elefant. And it's going to be on view till the 17th of September. The second curator is Ksenia Malykh, and she is now in Ukraine, but she's going to come for the finissage. So in case if you're interested in the guided tour, we are very much welcome to see it. I will make, I think, a long introduction about why are we actually doing that, and I think everybody know already what the talk is going to be today about, but I also want to say that the exhibition, probably you saw also already the exhibition, but in general the whole exhibition was made as a contrast statement to the idea that the war in Ukraine is a kind of proxy war, that this is just a polygon, that Russia, conditional Russia and conditional West is using right now. And I think that was very much popularized idea, and we were trying to think together with Ksenia how to dig a little bit into the history of contemporary Ukraine as an independent state, and if it's possible to see what kind of causes were influencing the war that we are seeing and experiencing right now. And yeah, in case if you were at the exhibition, you probably saw several works that are featuring very much complicated contexts that are talking about the annexation of the Crimea in 2014, and what was happening before that with the work by Arsen Savadov and Georgy Senchenko, talking about the division of the Soviet fleet and how it influenced into actually Budapest Memorandum, and how is it concerning the war that is happening right now. Also, some of the works are featuring complicated context on the east of Ukraine, and also some of the works mention Kherson, for example. And in general, our idea was to dig a little bit and to bring some local context to talk more about it. And today, we also wanted to talk about that. Also, I want to say that the whole we have also a public program created by Kateryna Tarabukina, and we will also have some additional another lectures and talks. But I think today is also very important to talk not only about post-communism, but also about the ways how the war can be perceived by the also conditional West, or from the point of view of conditional East, and if some of the statements had been changed during the last 2 years or not. And yeah, so this is how it's the conversation is going to happen. And I will start with asking questions, but I think that at the end the discussion will be more in collaboration with you. So in case if you will have any additional questions, I think we will leave more time to talk all together. And today I will present the main characters today. So I'm yes of this fairy tale about post-communism, and we are very happy, and I'm very grateful that you agreed to come here. Boris Buden, I think everybody knows Boris Buden, philosopher, critic, and writer from Croatia, and I think that you have a big fan base in Ukraine, and you were coming several times. And I remember that I was by myself in 2016 in one of the discussions that were happening in the Shevchenko Museum. But also, your book was crazy popular about the end, basically, of post-communism. It was called Zones of Transition on the End of Post-Communism. It was translated to Ukrainian by Medusa Publishing. And it was after several years after it was published, it was impossible to buy it anywhere, even in some eBay Kleinanzeigen analogs. And yeah, I think it was something that I remember myself reading it. It was very emancipating, because for me personally, it was like eye-opening in the sense that we actually like can fight back, because it's so deep inside of your state of mind that you perceive yourself as a kid from the East so much, and that was very emancipating to read that. And this like global analysis, more like I would say macro analysis of the situations that are happening, but also the first part of the book is telling a lot about the war crimes and about all atrocities of the war. And I think this is also something that made understand what the war is. And I think this is also very important to to describe, if you are someone who have seen that, to describe that in a way that it would be interesting to someone who have not ever seen that and actually feels distanced. So another reason why we are here and talking about this topic is the article that you published 1 year ago, a little bit more than 1 year ago on eFlux, and I think that also a lot of Ukrainians and the huge fan base read it, and there were several like statements that were questionable, and I would actually like to talk about them, so I hope that we will talk about that, because I think that during the last 2 years, some statements that were applicable before the full-scale invasion just disappeared or crashed just because of the harsh reality. And that would be interesting just to understand if some of the statements changed or not. And yeah. Yes, and another character of this fairy tale is Leon Kahane, the artist from Berlin, which is also, it would be very interesting to talk with you, because Leon is an artist and also critic and also writer who recently there was a presentation of the book and discussion about Westplaning, and there was an interview that you were interviewing Vasil Cherepanin, director of Kyiv Biennial, but also visual of oh my god, Visual Culture Research Center, and yeah. So I think, oh sorry, the whole text, the whole interview was also kind of counter statement to your text, but also I think it's just interesting to talk maybe also about your practice, because I think that you are very much in your practice also digging inside of your family stories, for example. And this is interesting because this is, as from my point of view, it's not that much of macro view on the historical process, but bringing back and like in a very much, if even talking about design or some very much micro events that are happening and in your generational or in family stories. So I think it's also would be very interesting to talk with you about that, because also you're very much deep inside of the context. So yeah. And another thing that I also want to say that Leon will have exhibition opening next Thursday at the Judicious Museum. And yeah, I also would like to, if you would kind of present and promote it a little bit, that would be very nice. So yeah, that was a small introduction, and I think that it would be very nice to start with statement.
Yes, statement. Yeah, well, my statement would be actually very short, and it is more about to introduce myself in relation to this event we are talking about, to say a few words besides this fact that, you know, I'm philosopher. Yes, I did write and have been writing a lot on the concept of transition, which is the topic also today, and I will say also a few words about transition. My general point was, as you said, the end of post-communism. This was the 2009, the book. So my point was that at that time the so-called post-communist transition was over, not over because it has achieved its goals, but that the whole teleology of this transition has collapsed already there. And so my last book in English is called Transition to Nowhere. So, and actually I would, when we discuss it, say a few words on transition from a perspective which I have not actually analyzed so much. This is the economic side, because I mean the case of Ukraine is some sort of excess of transition from the economic side. So I will say a few words about it. But my theoretical background are theories of translation, of course, not only linguistically, but in terms of some much broader concept. If you would like to me to put it very simple, this would be the idea that the concept of translation can help us to think differently on the issues like globality, differently beyond the old concept of universality. So it has this very important moment. It's not only about understanding of people who speak allegedly different languages. Second, it's translation, and but what actually motivated me last year to write the text immediately, I had to write it. It was because of the experience of Yugoslav wars. When I say experience, you know, it's not. It's always difficult in different languages. You cannot say what you can say in one language, you cannot say in another language. If I would say it in English, it would mean either I have or I have not experience. But in German, experience is not something you can have or not have. You have to make it. Erfahrung machen. To make it means to create it, to produce it. And this was precisely my involvement in these wars, in the Croatian anti-war movement from '91. The war lasted actually, if we take the Macedonian, 6 months Macedonian war, almost 10 years. So I was actively working, writing, editing in this movement and magazines, etc., which was very easy. You know, if you think anti-war movement is something pacifist group of pacifist freaks, it is much more complicated. It is not only about being abstractly against war, not even concretely. You know, people would immediately think that we would not support at that time war. Oh yes, we did support, for instance, here's my friend from Belgrade. So we did support bombing of Belgrade. Sorry, bombs were falling on his head. I'm very sorry, but yeah. So it implies also some sort of politically articulated position, which is complicated. You know, of course, Lenin and Bolsheviks were anti-war, but they were not pacifist. Yeah? So this is very important because war has many levels. You know, it's not only front line. It's not only what happens somewhere where there is a concrete killing. There are also within a society forms of dissolution of society which are you know, at least worth reflecting upon. So. This was very important. I was thinking, according to this experience, is there anything what I might say at the beginning? And I was thinking, are there, you know, bad and good news on the ground of my experience? And first, I will tell you a good news, but the bad news about the good news, that it is the only one good news. And this good news is, as I said, my friend from Belgrade, you know, people in fact don't hate each other. And it is much easier than people expect, you know, after the war to restore contacts, and that people from Sarajevo who were for years bombed, you know, next year go to Belgrade and marry or do something together. So I'm not so much afraid about people, whether they will find to each other, whether there will be contact, human, cultural, common production, etc. For sure this will be. This is one part. The rest are bad news, and these bad news are about political consequences. As I'm saying, I am looking at this war from a certain perspective, which is this former Yugoslav war, which is 20 years after the war. It's some sort of retrospective, you know. People are now in the war, but I'm looking into long-lasting consequences of the war. And the worst thing is that there has never been political solutions which would sort of, you know, close this war. So these are my introductory elements, and I was thinking what to say at the beginning, and I found something. I will use it as a sort of motto. These are words. Branko Milanovic, I don't know, have you ever heard of Branko Milanovic? He's the world leading expert on the global inequality, you know, in economy and social development, originally from Serbia, but in the States, in New York. And I very much have been using his research in my reflection on the concept of transition, process of transition. And then on 24th of February last year, he wrote in then Twitter, I remember when first the war in Yugoslavia started in 91. Second, the NATO bombing of Serbia in 99. The United States attack on Iraq in 2003. And now the Russian attack on Ukraine. Every time as when you face a mortal disease, you hope some miracle will happen and the war will stop, but it never does. So there won't be miracle. The war will be going on, and this is what I already at the beginning of 91 could not understand, that it will last for 10 next years, and it will completely change not only life, social composition, but the political map of this part of the world. And migration is also part of it, that people will move and never come back. So these few words at the beginning, and then we can, you might now say few words, please.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And so yes, I'm an artist and I'm dealing with family issues, and maybe since you said that, maybe I have to explain this a little bit, even though it's always weird to talk about these things, but this like mapping oneself, to make yourself understandable or explain yourself or legitimize yourself, but yet I have to do it since you said that. So the story is that my family actually, they came from what is today parts of Ukraine, Western Ukraine. They were Jewish from Galicia. They left to Germany during the change of the century from 19th to 20th century. They lived in Berlin, close to here in the Städtel, Scheunenviertel, I'm sorry, in the Städtel, Scheunenviertel, or you could call it the Städtel. And some survived the Holocaust, some didn't. Those who survived, my grandfather, for example, he went to the Spanish Civil War to fight, and from there he went to the to France to join the resistance. He was in several camps. He was liberated, or he liberated himself. My grandmother was liberated from the camp in Drancy. They met again, or they met after they were they liberated themselves, or were liberated, met in France in the resistance, helped liberating Paris, and decided at some point to go to the GDR, to the east, because of some idea that they had of, first of all, to go back to their country, because at this point it was their country, they spoke the language, and also because they had this utopian idea of a better socialist beginning, and I think they were at least betrayed. I'm dealing with this a lot from my perspective as an artist. So what I'm interested is in all these historical events that for sure have a lot of political dimensions. For me, what is interesting is the cultural dimension. Is, of course, the question of why and how, especially when we're talking about the Shoah, because the Shoah has no political explanation in the sense of there is in some kind a benefit that you could explain with financial gain or something like this. So I have to think about the cultural implications. I have to think about a different level of gain of something that not only Germany, but everyone who participated or who developed an anti-Semitic worldview, what is the cultural value of an anti-Semitic worldview? And it has a cultural value. It is not a pure and sheer phantasma. It has a cultural value. It translates into images, to language, to arguments, to worldviews, and so on and so forth. And this is something we see until today. So this war, if we want to call it, is also a war that never ended, and it lives on in the following generations, because we have to deal with the same arguments, misunderstandings. We have to do a lot of debating, fighting around, often also in a certain political context. So the arguments that I'm trying to develop or that I'm trying to make when I'm talking about culture, they are referring to, for example, specific political conflicts, wars or so on, because they seem to me very common, or something that I know. And as I said, my family was in Ukraine. Nowadays, Ukraine, and they were not treated well in Ukraine. So I could also say, Ukraine, fuck you. But I don't, obviously, because I see a certain pattern. I see a certain pattern that I can recognize in the way that the argument about this war happens in Germany, how it's being shifted towards certain elements, how it's being dragged to others, and so on and so forth. So this is an interesting conflict for me, or it's yeah. So, and I see a lot of things, and I see a certain dynamic that defines, I think, from my perspective, defines all the current cultural debates, and they have to do with the way we memorize. They have to do with the way we identify ideology. So I give you one example only, and then I can also say something about the exhibition. It's the most simple. I like when it's, in the end, everything's often very simple, unfortunately. So, for example, in the GDR, how did they deal with their own National Socialist past? So first of all, what they had to do is, now being overnight anti-fascists out of a sudden, which helped them, of course, to not deal with their own past as heir of National Socialism. They created an analogy between the ideology of the National Socialists and the class enemy, which was the West. So out of a sudden, overnight, the National Socialist core culture, their ideology, which was based in anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was to National Socialism like Mac OS to the computer. It was what it was running on. This was what was the convincing element to bring people from all kind of political factions together. So overnight they flipped it, and they made it fit to their new utopian idea. So overnight the National Socialists were not anti-Western anymore in their self-description. They were not anti-capitalist anymore. They were not, thereby they also redefined what anti-Semitism is. And this is something that we have to deal with until today. And actually, if we look into the last couple of years, we had something that was called Second War of the Historian, or how was it in English? Zweiter Historikerstreit, so-called, second fight of historians, whatever.
The dispute of historians started in West Germany, actually, in the 80s.
The first one started in West Germany, the second one started 1 or 2 years ago. So there you see that all the arguments that have been developed or delivered in the time of the GDR are being revived now, and they, of course, correspond to current political events, to current dynamics in cultural debates and political debates. So we are actually dealing all the time with things that happened many years ago. And so this is something, for example, that I'm very interested in my own work. And this is what I'm trying to somehow illustrate, if you want to call it, in my works. So now in the work in the Jewish Museum, I'm dealing with the fact that my grandparents were people who, by biography or identity, were legitimizing the self-description of the GDR. But yet they were actually anti-fascists. They were not Nazis that declared themselves on paper anti-fascists. They actually lived this, they fought this, So they had a completely different idea. And yet they also, in a certain way, benefited. They were in a double bind. But they could also not really speak up. They couldn't be Jews. They were anti-fascists because there was no anti-Semitism. Jewish in the GDR meant someone who signed up for the Gemeinde. If you had an identity card of the Jewish community, then you were Jewish. But it had no cultural element. But it actually has cultural elements. So there's a lot of canceling of cultural identity. A lot of these things were necessary to create a certain state, literally a state, that had a cultural identity in itself, GDR, and this is what I'm somehow trying to elaborate on, and how people like my grandparents maneuvered in there, and yet also my grandmother, she was a paintress, and in a certain way she was also having jobs that were given to her by the state. My grandfather, he was a journalist for Neues Deutschland, a newspaper. So somehow there is a certain way of contradiction that is almost it's unbearable almost for these people. And this is something that I'm really trying to deal with, and that maybe also brought me here today. I don't know. That's what I guess.
Thank you so much. Yeah, for me, I don't know how is it happening in other minds, but in my mind it was exactly about that, about very personal digging into family stories, and about general this macro view, and which I think both are very interesting approaches. And I think next question is the first basically question is about terminology, and I think you partly answered already this question, but I will ask a little bit wider, because I would also like to hear what you would think about that. So this is about, in general, post-communism and post-Soviet in these terminologies, because I think that in last 2 years, from the beginning of the full-scale invasion, like year and a half, I think in media, especially from Ukrainian critics and writers, a lot of texts actually asking that in this attempt to emphasize identity, cultural identity, it's kind of hard to navigate in anything that makes globalizes that much the experience. And also I think from your speech it's kind of visible that experience from GDR or former Yugoslavia or Ukraine or I don't know, Voronezh, for example, it differs a lot. Yeah, this is something that I wanted to ask, and I think in your book also you were saying, oh, and this is a question from Maxim Hodak, who is my former student and your former student and your student this year in the Angewandte. So he was also asking about your line in the book when you were saying that the wall, the collapse of the wall could be symbol of the end, the collapse of the communism. And yeah, actually he was asking, could be, for example, conditional, disappearing of, not disappearing, but like disappearing of Mariupol, of the whole city, could be conditional and a symbol of the end of post-communism, for example, or you would think that something else could be. In case if you could bring some kind of very precise example, could it be something just because you were mentioning the wall? But in general, I'm just very curious in, would you think it's still applicable, for example, to use this terminology, or maybe there should be some kind of another terminology that you were thinking about?
Well, you know, as I said, speaking of this experience of former Yugoslav war, they would always say, you said Mariupol, they would say Vukovar, you know, that was completely destroyed 91 by the Yugoslav army and Serbian paramilitaries. And it was also very, you know, traumatic moment. However, it was followed by Sarajevo, and Sarajevo was followed by Srebrenica. You know, it was getting worse and worse and worse, and then let's hope that Mariupol is the worst thing that happened. However, the problem with transition, whether do we need, you know, the end of post-communism, the end is the impossibility to imagine a better future for these countries that were under the so-called communist rule until 89. And this is, I mentioned Branko Milanovic, and he was famous because already in 1914 he dealt with these inequalities, and then his famous blog 2014, and people were really motivated to do research on this, but the title was "For Whom the Wall Fell, a balance sheet of the transition to capitalism." And then this very, very clear statement: only 1 out of 10 people living in transition countries have seen a successful transition to capitalism and more democracy, which means that 90% of people in the post-communist countries have not seen any improvement, which means that the whole concept, as ideological concept, has failed from the very beginning. The worst case economically is Ukraine. Ukraine is the absolute loser of transition. Already 2013, 14, before the first war, Ukraine had did not reach the development level of 85, which means already at that time Ukraine was losing the whole concept, the whole process of the so-called catching up with the West, which means that Ukraine had minus 35% development, minus. The other countries are, you would not believe there are losers and winners of transition. There are actually 4 winners of transition. These are the countries that have managed to develop so that they can catch up with the so-called West. This is Poland. This is Poland. This is Estonia. This is Albania. Sorry? Slovenia. No, Slovenia has not. Slovenia has not. Albania, Poland. So only few countries have managed to reach some sort of 2.5 growth of GDP, which gives them a chance to catch up with the West. The rest cannot catch up with the West. And then I have a very nice quote from Milanovic, about Ukrainians, which says that another point, both Russia and Ukraine are the worst in terms of inequality in the world. So that the difference, the equality level is the highest for both, for Ukraine and for Russia. The share of wealth within GDP by the private billionaires is 20 to 25%. Only Chile is worse. These are three worst countries in terms of inequality. Speaking of these differences, and then when it comes, the idea was that catching up with the West would, sometime, if you do whatever is expected of you, you will sooner or later catch up. This will never happen. And Milanovic writes, for instance, that these countries, like Ukraine, for instance, they have wasted 3 to 4 generations. At current rates of growth, it might take them some 50 or 60 years for Ukraine not to reach the West, but to come back to the 85, which means, for the rest of your life, if you come back to Ukraine, you will be catching up not with the West, but with the past. And even you won't manage to come to the level of development of 85. This is what is the end of the whole idea of transition in terms of development. I have many, yes, which one country is the fourth most successful? Well, I suppressed it, because it is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I forgot it. Belarus. Belarus is among 4 most successful countries in the post-communist transition, which tells you something, that you don't need any democracy to be economically successful. While Ukraine was, in terms of development, had a minus growth, Belarus had 98% growth. So these are Russia is double so good as Ukraine, but it's only around 1% growth, which is, not enough for catching up with the West. But what is even much worse? It's not about catching up with the West, because the growth rates in the West are below the average global growth rates. The best is Poland. Poland is around between 2.5% and 3% GDP per capita growth, which is absolute success. However, global average growth rate is 3.8%. So we are talking about failure of the whole West and Western Europe. But in terms of, again, you know, this idea of the process of transition, if you follow the rules, if you do whatever they tell you to do, at the end you will develop some so-called normal, prosperous democracy, economy, etc., and you will catch up. No, you will never catch up. This is what is the idea. As I said, you know, you are very young, but in an optimistical vision, you know, if you return to Ukraine, which I hope you won't, then you will spend your whole life, you know, catching up with the better past. So these are the elements. I have many interesting, unbelievable data, unbelievable economic data, which is, I have to say something that the new generations of young critic intellectuals in former Yugoslavia, you know, they slowly, you know, cease to constantly think in terms of identities, cultural conflicts, etc., and started to analyze these relations. These relations are, if you think of it, they are in themselves. You know, they tell you how the situation is catastrophic. These data were collected and analyzed before the war, which means now it is even much worse.
Of course it's worse. They're in war. Their attack cannot be better. But I have a question. I don't really understand. Maybe I'm not smart enough for these things, but I don't really understand the connection between everything you just said, the paper you wrote, your reaction to the war you wrote. I mean, I don't really see the vision here. Like, what is, if you say all this, it sounds like, if it would be a company, it sounds like, okay, close the company, let's start something new. What is the vision? Like, and how does this translate into the analysis that you made in the Eflux writing?
Well, in the Eflux I made as you know, analysis of the concept of the West and the war, but I did not use only, I knew something about this data, but I did not use this data. But your question is about, like classical što dělec, what is to be done. I don't know what is to be done, but only thing I know is that the concept of developing, capitalism plus democracy, so-called major pattern of transition ideology, that it has collapsed. How it will be developed, I don't know. But what I can send you on the ground of experiences of former Yugoslavia, which very much influenced my text in Eflux, is that we have created, or what has been created, what has been creating all the time, is a certain condition of anomy, of disorder, and the order will not be restored again. This is for sure. After the war in former Yugoslavia, there is no order. This would be my next point. This is at the beginning of my book. Is Giorgio Agamben at the beginning of this, after the collapse of communism, in his Homo Sacer, he wrote that we should understand these events not in terms of temporary fall back into the state of nature, war all against all, that will be, come to an end, and the normality and order will be restored in terms of new social contracts, etc. This is wrong. He saw it already at that time that with the collapse of communism, the moment of disorder started and has been spreading, and he would say the war in Yugoslavia were bloody messengers of the new nomos on earth, using this Carl Schmitt, new nomos on earth in terms of collapse of order. And if you look at former Yugoslavia after the war, now it is 20 years after the war, there are no normal states. You know? So states that would have sort of borders, nation states. If you would ask me how to call this area in terms of regime, it is what we might call Pax Americana, you know, which Bosnia was created in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio. They cut the borders. They created everything. They created some sort of, you know, country which is not democratic, which has a commissar that is above the parliament. Then, if you think, you know, you might ask yourself, is there any point at which Russia and Ukraine agree, and Ukraine and United States don't agree? Yes, it is. Russia and Ukraine don't recognize Kosovo. This is what they have in common. It is very interesting why they don't recognize Kosovo, while America recognizes Kosovo. It is about changing borders in Europe. It is about destruction of the legal system. And in this case, it was the West that organized precisely this. This is what I mentioned at the beginning. Oh yes, we were very much supportive of the military intervention of NATO in Kosovo to stop this killing, to stop this catastrophe. But I wrote at that time that while NATO and the West is a military giant, it's political dwarf, because they were not able to create after the war any sort of legal situation, normality, so that you have now Kosovo, which is not part of Serbia. Think of Crimea, you know. This is why Ukraine does not recognize Kosovo, because it would legalize the right to occupy and separate Crimea. Then, so you have Spain, you have Belgium, you have Slovakia, you have Romania, you have Greece, Cyprus, and Ukraine, which don't recognize. You understand why. So this is if I'm saying, you ask me, this was the motivation behind my analysis in Iflux.
Of course.
Yeah, I just had comment to the statistics, because this is something that I started to feel like concerned a little bit about it, because I think here the statistic is applicable to more or less equal states, and I think also in last 2 years there are a lot of texts about power dynamics inside of this so-called post-communistic state and post-Soviet state. And I think this exhibition is also partly about that, because, for example, you mentioned that when at 2013, Ukraine was very much below the needed economical state as was desired before. And I think that also exhibitions is about that partly because, for example, one of the works by Piotr Romanowski is telling a very much complicated story in Donetsk, and those miners and liquidators who were not happy with presidency of Yanukovych. And after that, we can dig and see how much under Russian influence was Ukraine. And even if we will see this work from 1994, Voices of Love, then also I think it's seen how much of influence during that time also Ukraine had under this pressure and having this debt, and how much, under pressure was Ukraine starting from the beginning of being independent. So yeah, I think that also one of the statements that Ukrainians are having right now is that it's very hard to make like some kind of comparativistic analysis on development of Russia, for example, in Ukraine, because at the beginning even of 90s, the assets were very different and the lands were very different. And Yeah, and basically Russia is the main inheritant of the Soviet Union in the culture that had left after that. So I think that was the question about the like post-communism and post-Soviet, and about how different actually power dynamics inside of it. And I'm sure that in former Yugoslavia it's kind of the same. So yeah. I just, because of that, I was not, I was a little bit concerned about if the statistics could be applicable to this situation, because that's true, but yeah, it's just the assets were very different, and yeah.
In fact, Ukraine was more developed than Belarus. So it's even worse, you know, on the 89.
Yeah, but Belarus is a country who was not even ever thinking about going under Lukashenko, going like setting apart and separating from Russia, for example.
Well, I don't know, but the fact is that Belarus, which has a sort of dictatorship, is very successful. Which you know, this is nothing. We don't need democracy to have economic prosperity. South Korea might be also. Sorry? Have you ever been to Belarus? No, I have never been to Belarus.
Wait.
No. This says nothing. You mean that what? A personal experience gives some idea about it? No, I don't think so. You know, there is, even if you analyze Poland, you know, then you will see that it is huge, that it's called so-called Poland A and Poland B. Poland A is urban space. This is that is very much developed. And Poland B is the base of the conservative government today, which is completely different. So you can go wherever you want. But it is not about personal experiences, it is about economic measures.
Check and visit these Poland A and Poland B, because it can be very interesting. And check please data about how right now, where are people who vote for different...
Yes, this, okay.
Because I think it has changed and it will be very...
I hope so.
Can I comment on the?
Yeah.
I'm just. Are we opening for questions? You want to say so?
Yeah,
okay,
you
so
just guys.
It
You have
seems to
already
be a
started.
big.
Yeah.
So very important was this like elite, communist elite, because you can see that in communism era was the current elite class. Our like satirics writers, and you can see a lot of documented all people who were in power. They had a lot of goods. Like it was also incomparable with normal former Soviet citizens. And when Soviet Union fall, they got like an endless power. They just it's like how oligarch appears. A lot of oligarchs, it's just like communists, communist functioner, and it's not because of capitalism. Capitalism was, but it's not only because of capitalism system. This inequality in Ukraine is so it's because people who really people in Soviet time, people who was a leader of, for example, fabric or like political functioner, they got everything. They just they have very big possibility for corruption and speculation, and they did it, and they just did they did it in even more scale after 91. I think it's very important to say now, because it can seem that it can to be perceived like a new order. It was something what destroyed Russia, Ukraine, and all other countries, but also communism and previous politics was something which already was like a bomb for a future in national conflicts too, with these deportations and politics. When you have any place where like nations or like little more or bigger nations just exist, they were like mixed in very violent way, and it's also ground for future conflicts, and it was a like method of control. Thank you. Sorry.
Leon, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to, I just, because all this data and the question of transition is not so much my field, but I read, of course, something in this essay that interests me. And of course, we also had a transition here, and it is a transition that is also still referred to, and I try again to bring it a bit so that I can somehow participate in this, to the question, to some cultural questions. Because you wrote that Putin is, or Russia is actually the only place that doesn't gain anything from this war.
Sorry, that
Russia doesn't gain anything, has nothing to get from this war. And that somehow you ask the question why Putin is making himself somehow complicit in a Western idea, dynamic, whatever. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, this is what I...
Yeah, I use the notion, the useful idiot of the West.
The useful idiot of the West.
Yeah,
okay, so I was not completely wrong.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so what I think is that if we ask ourselves what the West is, and to ask the question why there is a problem also in the West. We see this now in America. We see this in Germany and Europe, all over the place. The crisis of the West leads, for example, to a rise in identitarian movements, parties, AfD. What are they? What do they? What is the first thing that happens? It's a destabilization of institutions. It's immediately like a hit on cultural questions. In Germany, it's not for no reason that Björn Höcke says we need a 180-degree turn in cultural politics and memorial politics. So the idea here is also a sovereignty from a Western idea that is believing or actually based on functioning institutions, on functioning mostly parliamentary democracies, and so on and so forth. And what I saw often in this moment, also, it's an active destabilization of institutions, right? I think in the beginning of the AfD, what they meant was like attacking, almost bombarding institutions with official questions, like trying to make them dysfunctional and so on and so forth. So people in right-wing movements know very precisely where the enemy is most vulnerable, and Russia also knows where the enemy is most vulnerable. If we would say the biggest enemy in the Cold War of Russia was America, the Cold Warriors from the past are the Putin trolls of the present. This is what we see in America, and it is very, very concerning, to me, at least. And what I'm often dealing with now in my work and more is a certain projection towards the East. And the projection towards the East, I say this because the East is not only like a direction or a region, it's also in places like Germany, Europe, America, it is also an ideology. It's an idea of a life that is mainly that sets yourself free from the responsibilities that come with the idea of the West. An idea of the West that for sure is not fulfilled anywhere in perfection, but it is based, of course, on the individual. The individual is based on an idea of guilt, of self-responsibility. It cannot be an individual without this. In this whole context, the whole idea of the Holocaust, you also refer this, by the way, and I disagree, to be honest, that Germany can cope with its past through helping Ukraine. I see it actually quite opposite if I look to the majority of the people, not to official statements, but I'm talking now about the sentiment of many people to get sovereignty from this past, to get sovereignty from all this West, because Germany, when was Germany starting to be West? In the BRD, in the Bundesrepublik Deutschland. Before this, Germany was never really West. It always had a very strong sentiment against the West, mainly against the nation state, starting with the whole French Revolution and so on and so forth. So I see here actually on a cultural level a huge benefit for Putin. A huge benefit for Putin when I think about what the idea of the East on a cultural level, and on the level that I experience it in a way of a projection in Germany, what it delivers. And it delivers something that actually, in a certain way, you almost, I'm sorry now, it becomes a bit critical, or you almost perform this in this text, because somehow Putin, we all agree he is the perpetrator, but in a certain way, he's also a victim. And this is something that I saw in the GDR. It is every stage of the transformation of East Germany was like a line of a continuity of victimhood, from first being victims of Hitler's war. This is what they said. The German people are the victim of Hitler's war. This was a thing that the people said. This was official narrative in the GDR. And when they talked about the people in Germany, they meant, by the way, in this singular case, they also agreed on something here. They meant all Germans, including West Germans. Then being victim of the regime GDR, being victim of Stasi, and then being victim of the West. And being victim of the West meant, in the tradition, 1989, we are sold out, and now we are victims. And this led to many twisted ideas, talking about Rostock-Lichtenhagen, Hoyerswerda, all these things, where out of a sudden perpetrators became victims of westernization, of the transformation, and that everything that was constituted by a claimed break in 1948, let's say, a claimed break, which was the first transition from National Socialists to anti-fascists overnight. This break constituted the continuity, the cultural underlying continuity, the thinking, the mindset of Germany before 45. And this is why we also have a political outcome today in the former East. You have all this idea that they were losing the transition. They were winning it. Of course, there was a lot of losing, but if you think like realistically, if you would consider the GDR would still exist and you go now to Thüringen, I doubted that it would be just as close as prosperous as it is today. Does it have problems? Many. Are people still paid less than in the West? They are. I can say it about my own father. He almost gets almost no pension. So I have to help him out, But I'm just saying, it's like, but on a cultural level, and on the level what this legitimizes, what kind of arguments and what kind of shift this legitimizes politically, this is, I think, very frightening, and I think this argument to me doesn't make sense, because I think Putin solves all those problems here. That's my perspective onto this.
Yeah.
But I think on the data, we can
Yeah.
say, no, it doesn't. And so on.
I don't know. What do you mean, Putin? What you think is my position towards Putin?
No, for when you said he's the useful idiot of the West.
Aha, yeah, yes.
So I cannot really see this because in a
Yeah.
certain way, this idea of making him somehow, this almost sounds like being a victim or being.
No, in my text I have a very clear picture of what is my wish about Putin. You know, since I might. George Orwell, you know, 1940 wrote about Adolf Hitler, and he wrote that if I would get within his reach, I would certainly kill him. This is probably my opinion on Putin. If I would, you know, I would try to kill him.
I understand,
but just like let me. So in the picture. In my text, I write that Putin deserves fate worse than Ceausescu, to be executed after short process in the basement of Kremlin. You know, this is why in Geopolitica, Dugin, they accuse me of promoting civil war in Russia, which I really do. I won't see civil war in Russia. However, there are these differences, you know. The Western civil war is installing some guy who would be, as people say, pro-Western, but without changing this basic post-communist relation, this system, oligarchic system, in which these Russian billionaires are, like in Ukraine, you know, the major shareholders of the GDP. Without changing this system, there won't be any positive transformation. This is it's very, very clear. Of course, Putin is responsible because he launched. This was his decision, but we shall, in our understanding, go beyond and think: what is this situation? What is the West, for instance? What is the West?
I have a very clear idea what the West is.
Well, the West, I can say, first, it is not a democracy, because there is no, you know, there's no government of the West. We don't know what is West. It is for sure not a region. It is some sort of normative identity block. But in fact, the West is sort of relation. You know, there is no West without the rest. And it is mostly, the West is defined by the so-called civilizational difference. The West is civilization, the rest is not civilization. It is very complicated, but this is something new, you know, like 30, 40 years ago, there was not so much talk about the West. And in the 90s, it was very much talk about Europe, not so much about the West. The West in itself, according to Wallenstein, has been in decline since 70s. So the West is not something winning. The West is not something that wins wars and that has solutions, political solutions to the world. So the problem is, and I saw this problem very, very concretely in Ilya Budreitsky invited me to Moscow to a conference in Sakharov Center. This was mostly opposition to Putin. And I was criticizing the West. And they immediately understood I'm so communist, you know. And then they asked, who brought this communist? And I understood that this opposition has only very, very, very simple binary understanding of the world, which is you are either for Putin or for United States. And there is nothing else, either pro-Western or pro-Putin. And this was too short for me. I remember, and I think this is itself a huge huge problem that we use this notion, and it has been everywhere. You know, you can everywhere read the West has decided, the West supports, does not support, how long it should support, how much. You know, the West does this, but who is the West? Who decides? You know, we don't know who decides. So, if you ask me what is the West, West is the you know, concept of some sort of new post-national sovereignty.
Can I give a different example of what the West and the East might be?
Yeah.
Interpretation.
Yeah.
That for many people, I think from their gut feelings, is very, very clear. There's a very famous artist in Germany that I very much don't like. His name is Joseph Beuys, used to be Joseph Beuys. He divided the world in a very Manichaeic worldview into the Ostmensch, East man person, and the Westmensch, West person. And you could somehow create an analogy between the idealist and the materialist. This is how he somehow identifies West, as he somehow identifies East. East for him is both are projections, both are ideas of what it means. Of course, he loved the Eastmensch, so he built all his esoteric bullshit works where he sends his Eurasian stab, his Eurasia stick, where he sends the Eastern energy to the West and tries to make the West irrational and feeling and deep and somehow close to Wagner and Heidegger and you know, and the West somehow, of course, is rationality, is
Habermas.
is somehow Habermas maybe, yeah, but it is something also another figure for him.
Yeah.
It's Moses. So I give you why I'm saying this, because people in Germany love him and they think he is a second Jesus or something like this. So and especially in the art world, and until today they don't understand where the problem is and why this guy was culturally a National Socialist, not only on paper but culturally a National Socialist. So so what he says is, for him, he twisted the Holocaust. He says the Holocaust was the deepest point of Western materialism. This is what he says. This is his interpretation of the Holocaust, which is exactly twisted in its opposite direction. But which was also common, if we think about Grigory Dimitrov, in the same also in the East, where people identified the Nazis, National Socialism, he said, or fascism is the highest form of financial capitalism. And in the GDR they used this, even if he said it earlier, but they referred to it all the time, and again made this twist. But anyway, so in another statement, Beuys says the first materialist is Moses, and here he's right. Because what Moses did, if we think about not so much about religion, but let's say about practicality, he creates self-responsibility. He says, you cannot pray to this cow and think tomorrow it will rain or whatever. You have to do it by yourself. There is no life after this. Every problem has to be solved in this life. You have to solve it. You have to take it into your own hand. So you yourself are also, like, you have, how do you say, guilt in this case is like a more dialectic thing. Guilty, you know, like I can also be guilty of doing something good. I can only paraphrase it because I could say it in German, but I don't know how to say it in English. Anyway, so he creates this idea and he combines it with a law. He says there is someone who is abstract. He doesn't even exist. He actually he eradicates a god. He creates an idea of a moral entity that is almost like a judge. He judges, and these are the laws. So this is the birth moment of something that is until today considered to be West. And when people today have come up with this projection towards the East, they want to get rid of all of this. And this is something. If we talk, for example, in terms of Saul Friedlander, Erlösungsantisemitismus, Holocaust was always it is an idea. It's anti-Semitism is a cultural technique. It's an idea of solving yourself or relieving yourself from your inner contradictions. The more conflicts we have, the more we run into all our contradictions, the bigger gets the wish to get out of these contradictions, and the stronger is the cry for destabilizing all these institutions. To say, you know, like you always find the reason for your inner conflict somewhere outside. And this is where always this idea, this romanticization idea of the East comes back. And actually, to me, it sounds pretty similar to paradise. So we can say the East and the West, it's like new concepts, but from what it serves today, what it helps people to cope with their lives, it's actually something completely different. To me, it's something very on a cultural level. And this is where this argument doesn't make sense to me, because what you say, I can understand. I also want to kill Putin. I would think about, because then maybe I also know what happened when someone gets killed, the martyr, you know, like the martyr. So we know all this. So maybe we better don't kill him, you know. Don't make him bigger than he is. But in the end, I think there is a gain in this war against Ukraine, which reaches not for no reason to all these Western countries, which is so attractive to them, which is also where this is why I'm also not agreeing with the idea that it's just the West that decides, or that the West somehow could have stopped it or something, because I agree with you. The West is, who is the West? It's not who is the West, it's what is the West, and is it something else than just the American dream or the idea of a united European Union, or is it maybe laying in a cultural idea, like you cannot have democracy without a democratic culture. If people don't believe that an institution needs to function, like we see it in America, if they do not accept the fact that an election, for example, is lost, they can destabilize everything, because there needs to be an understanding of this. It's almost like being a grown-up, almost, you know, versus being a child. And this is somehow what I read here a bit, what talks to me, what interests me. The rest I cannot say so much about, because so this is my definition of the West.
I don't think that we cannot have democracy without democratic culture, because if we accept this, then we will have a huge hierarchy, you know, dividing people in those who are able for a democratic life, and the other who have to wait until the moment they will become able to live in democracy, which is the problem of the differentiation between the West and, you said, former East, which is interesting that we have been, that just to remind you, Igor Zabel, the late curator from Slovenia, many years ago, you know, when there were this talk about former East, he asked, everybody's talking about former East, why nobody's talking about former West? So this was the motivation for the whole project, you know, former West. But this is in itself interesting, that we think in these categories and notions of normative identity blocks, which are culturally defined. But this is what I don't see as a solution, you know, because this projection of certain features into some sort of identity immediately dehistoricize this identity. So we think Russia is a certain identity, you know, Russian world, as they call it, yeah, that it is certain identity, and we think that on the other side, we should not make differences between Tsar Nikolai and Lenin, between Lenin and Stalin, between Stalin and Khrushchev, between Gorbachev and Putin. I think we should. We should make these differences, and we should make differences when it comes to the West, and we should make differences between military interventions, wars waged by the West, wars that the West very often loses, with the huge consequences for the world. Or Europe and the West, changing borders, I said, changing borders in Europe. At the same time, putting pressure on Serbia to accept that it should cede one part of its territory to, to create 2.5 Albanian states in the Balkans, which is a nonsense, complete nonsense on one side. And on another side, insisting on the so-called legal order when it comes to Ukraine. And we can see tomorrow there will be a deal. Ukraine, Crimea will be exchanged the recognition of Crimea for the recognition of Kosovo. But anyway, I think the West is not a solution. The West is a problem. It is a huge problem. And if you would ask me what is the West, I would say the West is some sort of it's utopia of anti-communism. It's like communism of anti-communism. So that you have some sort of imagined place where everything is at its place and then functions perfectly. The only thing you have to do is to arrive at this destination. And when you arrive at this destination, everything will be solved. Yeah.
But there's one aspect that I want to refer to, because it's interesting that you say that. Because just to clarify, when I say this, first of all, I don't think the East is over, because I see it in the way that I try to say it. Because people in Germany who refer what I said, project on the idea of what they have on the East, are the same people that say that that Germany is turning into a second GDR. So these are often people who are actually themselves anti-communist. They're not referring, when they refer to the East, they're not referring to the Soviet Union. They're referring to a cultural offer that Putin is making. That is helpful for them in their own cultural wars that they are fighting inside of the West. And this is the big gain. Also, probably it's a big financial gain. But this is the point. I don't think that probably you're talking about something very concrete and specific, states and so on. But my perspective on this whole thing is that this is absolutely not what is attractive here. What the real attraction is on a global scale of this war, and it is obviously a war that concerns everyone.
Shall we
Yeah.
invite audience to ask?
Can I have the last question?
Yeah.
I'm just okay. Maybe it will be a very stupid question, but I'm very curious, and I don't understand that. And my question is if it actually makes sense to draw and find similarities. For example, in some states they're trying to be independent, because I think even situation with Crimea, where I'm from, by the way, and in Donetsk are very different, even within one state. And I'm sure that in Kosovo, for example, or in Spain, it also very different situations. And I think the whole idea behind this talk is I was seeing that to drag more into like historical context, and I don't know if maybe there were some additional examples before that were functioning, how history was repeating or rhyming itself in a way. But I don't know. I think that this is something that triggers me every time when I see some kind of globalization and attempt to show that this is some kind of similar situation. I think that is the biggest problem, because it also shows about some kind of attempt to distance and to look from afar. And this is what I also think that you were doing, and to bring into very specific examples. So I think the question would be if your experience of war have you found any kind of similarities, like new for you, in the work that is happening right now, and if it makes sense to bring them and see some kind of similarities in them?
The first, history does not repeat itself. It is always something else, and there are definitely similarities. But look, on the ground of norms of what you call international justice, what you call legal system of nation states, you have violation or not, you have occupation or not, you have redrawing borders or not, and the problem is, as I said, that the West at the same time redraws borders in Europe, violates the international law, and accuses Russia of violating international law and changing borders. So this is a contradiction. How to deal with this contradiction, I don't know. This is why I think the West is not solution. This is one thing. Of course, there are differences, but this is the fact that you cannot protect order. You have yourself destroyed. You have been destroying yourself. So this is the major problem. When it comes to military support, oh yes, this is even, you know, Serbia, who is the biggest friend of Russia, actually military supports and sends weapons and ammunition massively to Ukraine. I don't see this is the problem. But the problem is something similar and this is similarities. In Bosnia, Kosovo, the West intervened and stopped killing, which was great, which we supported. But the political solution created after the war, imposed by this West, as I said, you know, borders cut in Ohio, in Dayton, they created a system which cannot be reintroduced in the old order. We have something completely new disorder, and it is not, you know, Libya, Syria, Israel, Iraq. This is Bosnia. This is you know, if I would now talk to tell you how what I call Pax Americana looks like in Kosovo and Macedonia, you know, how, what sort of constructions political these countries are. I don't know, shall we cry or laugh about it? This is not a system of sovereign nation states. And today, no state is sovereign economically. Not even United States is sovereign. Of course, Ukraine will never be economically sovereign. But the question is, how, of whom will it be dependent? I don't know, but I can see already now. So there are many similarities, but as I said at the very beginning, the only good news is that people are not that bad, and they hate each other as we believe. The rest are bad news, that they consist of the impossibility of political solution to this war. And there won't be, you know, if you think at the end there will be a restoration of a sovereignty of Ukraine on all its territory, and there will be, you know, restoration of national statehood and some sort of prosperity, etc. Besides, I don't know, Russia as a sovereign state recognizing this won't happen. These are new spaces of disorder, and looking now back 20 years after the Yugoslav war, you have peace in the southern part because of the American military base. And this is the only garant of the peace. Otherwise, it won't be functioning. These are vassal states, nation states. Even the one I come originally from, Croatia, has no future in terms in this relation, because this will affect Ukraine even much stronger. This is depopulation, which means that At the end of the century in Croatia, there will be 60% of people older than 65 years, which you cannot imagine, you know. The so-called national languages, European Union did a research of how European languages cope with digitalization. And this was for years, you know, research, and they realized that 21 of 30 European languages analyzed won't survive digital age. So that you know, these languages have no chance to survive. So this will affect also Ukraine. And then similar Croatia, Serbia, etc. We are facing huge transformations, and the point is that there will be no way back. The old order won't be restored. And it is not the world of sovereign nation state, independent, that recognize each other within some sort of legal order. You know, it is not functioning. Just like, to give you one example, Gordon Brown a month ago in Guardian came up with supported this idea about Hague Tribunal for war criminals in Ukraine. You know, Russian, mostly Russian and Donetsk Republic, I don't know. Well, it sounds like a good idea, but it is the Hague Tribunal in relation to former Yugoslavia is total failure, because you know now these guys who spent like 15 years in jail, prosecuted, you know, as a war criminals, they return as a national heroes. You know, you come to Belgrade and then you will see graffitis of Ratko Mladic. This is the guy who is responsible for genocide in Srebrenica, as a national hero. Just think of you know, Catholic Church in Croatia invites a guy who is responsible, spent 15 years in jail, responsible for killing the whole village and babies and everyone, and he comes and gives lectures for the students in Zagreb about how he discovered God in jail as a national hero. Look, Milosevic, this is something like, you know, for me, like Putin, at that time when he arose, you know, I was also dreaming about how to kill the guy. So, and he died in the Hague, in the tribunal. You know, Peter Handke, who won Nobel Prize for Literature, he attended his funeral. And that's when I talked to my Austrian friend, I wrote at that time against Handke, you know, and when I mentioned this to my Austrian friend, they said that I'm Croatian fascist. You know? So I just to repeat, there is a major flaw in the Hague Tribunal. It does not function. It has no political effects. It has wrong political effects. And it is based, what is the problem? It is based on the impunity of the West, because no Western politician can be prosecuted by the tribunal. This is the tribunal imposed from the West on the rest. And this impunity, inequality, you know, you cannot have justice without equality. It makes it impossible, you know. It won't produce any solutions. Which I'm not saying that Hague Tribunal is a bad idea. It is good idea for archive. It has the best archive possible about the war. And then there are so many researchers, and I know them, how they work. You know, you can reconstruct this war in you know, the tiniest details. Everything is told. Everything is there. You can produce thousands PhDs on this archive, on the war. But you have the guys who perpetrated genocide being you know, praised as heroes. So just imagine, you know, something similar would happen not only with Putin in Russia, if you get him to the jail, but you will have some Western, intellectuals attending his funerals, and who might get then Nobel Prize. I'm just like saying that things are much more complicated, and that there is no simple way out of this situation in terms of restoring some sort of order that was before. This was not an order. In former Yugoslavia, you will never have sovereign nation states. I don't know what it is. We don't have name for this. But this is something completely new, and we should, like new scholars say, that we should not use the notion of transition, that it is wrong, that it is, instead we should call it crisis. What is called transition is an ideological concept, and we should replace it by the notion of crisis. It started '89, deep crisis, and we are much deeper now into this crisis.
Thank you. I think we'll have to start, questions. But
Ira, you have to come here.
Oh my God, thank you so much. My name is Irina. I'm Ukrainian, and I am the Ukraine. Why is that? Because I was born in 1992. Please here catch the thought and follow it. I was born in the independent Ukraine. I was born in the state which was in the terms of chaos. Like when I have heard you saying Ukraine failed transition, I got very emotional about that. Like, oh my God, I will argue that so hard. But you're right. You're right in that terms, because Soviet Union falling apart was a very big Überraschung, was very big surprise for the nation. There was no plan. There was no plan how to transfer the economy, how to transfer politics. It was running in the complete chaos in which the strongest, like an animal, just could get it best. So that what has happened. The oligarchs took the power. The oligarchs get the economic forces, and that what caused the Ukrainian transition failure in the economical perspective, how you describing it. But it's just a little part of it. The thing is, what is very special about Ukraine is that this chaos, like a huge explosion, like in the universe, like a supernova, has burned the galaxy, has burned the state of Ukraine, of us, of my fellows, of my colleagues here who are Ukrainians, and we are very different. I'm sorry for my ageism from the generations before. We were burning this house. We have held our fellows, like who had revolution on the granite, like Orange Revolution, the revolution of dignity. The war, people who are fighting on the war right now, that burned this political pluralism. In comparison to the other states, we have every time changed our political powers, and that was a huge surprise to all of the world, like what the fuck is going on? Right now it's complete change of everything, because this is the nation of young generation who was searching for its purpose, for its place. And I would also agree with you on the point that West is not the solution, because we couldn't find this help from the West in our development as a nation, in our development as a country, in our political development. That's why I see a huge problem. But I'm not this post-Soviet person. I have nothing Soviet with me. even though the educational system was Soviet, even though the all other economical system was so much still Soviet, because there was no plan how to change it. People were doing what they used to do. But us, as a new generation, we come to the new point that maybe you are right. The West is not the solution. West has jeopardized itself with this fucked up, I'm sorry, like colonial history and this colonial falls, which is keeping coming up right now. We can see what's going on in Africa today and in the other countries. But you really, really much underestimate this freedom of will and freedom of new people who came in in really much chaos, which gives the freedom. The problem in the journey, so that we had a chance also to left the history behind and come up with our new selves, our new ways of doing that. We're still fighting the corruption, we're still fighting the oligarchs, but we are doing that, and Ukraine showed a huge change and huge will of change in the last years. Incredible one. The problem with post-communism in Germany, that is also have never been worked. After the wall broke down, nobody in comparison to NS, like the Nazi time, nobody have been working on that. But we have been working on that. We have our decommunization laws, we have our development out of it. Even Communist Party is not legal in Ukraine anymore. That's the deal. And here, things didn't happen. And I would say that there is a huge point of nostalgia of the generations, I'm sorry again for my ageism, which are older than us, who are still believing in this romantic, nostalgic idea of communism and Soviet Union, who are still powering forces here in Germany and in Europe, who are still carrying that. And Russia, as you know, like completely absorbed that and completely privatized like Soviet history in Europe. And they are really much playing on that. They are very much playing on that, because even in the history, whatever text you read, like to Soviet people referring as Russians. And that's a huge, huge problem, which is still being played and still being used and still not being educated what's going on in Germany. That's why me, as a young Ukrainian, as a Ukraine in itself, because I believe so much in my people right now, we will make a change, and we won't go to this frameworks of West or the frameworks of East. It will be a new order. It will be new ways of dealing with the world. It will be new ways. We see what's going on right now, like Americans fucking crazy, afraid of China. They are crazy afraid what's going on in Africa and Middle East. It will be new order. It will be new subjective Ukraine, and will be new subjective countries, independent and democratic. And that's what we are fighting for, and that's the way which I'm really believing you are missing, that there will be another third option of democracy which have never been existed before, without these big powers. Yeah, that's all on me. Please comment.
I can only hope you're right. But according to my experience, looking into former Yugoslavia, 20 years after the war, there has been nothing comparable to these hopes you are now talking about. So maybe this would be a major difference. And apropos the privatization or Russia's privatization of Soviet past, in my text under the title "Russia is kaput," which I published. I call it, as a cultural and memory extractivism, that Russia deals with the common Soviet past in a similar way it deals with its gas and oil reserves. It just extracts it and privatizes it and sells it as a Russian, which is, of course, you have mentioned, it's a huge problem in Germany that they mistake Russia for Soviet. There is this huge misunderstanding of the Second World War, which in the south of Europe, where fascism is mostly experience of civil war, like in Spain, in Italy, Yugoslavia, and Greece, and not in the north. There is no this simple, Russians, Germans, Italians, etc. It is much more complicated. So, and especially from the perspective of former Yugoslavia, which, or me, I was, as a soldier in the former Yugoslavia, trained to defend Yugoslavia from the Soviet and East Bloc countries. So, and the Soviet communism was defined in the Yugoslav Central Committee already in 1950 as a form of state monopoly capitalism, which is worse than the Western one. So these are different experiences, historical experiences, and I'm fully aware of what is this expropriation of the international past, which is Soviet Union is international, But this is why we should also differentiate, looking back into this past, differentiate between Lenin and Stalin, between Stalin and Khrushchev when it comes to Crimea, to the borders. We should differentiate. And accepting the concept of identity means dehistoricize our experience, to see, identity is atemporal. It is as it is. The West is some sort of frozen cluster of perfect values and features, rule of law, rationality, democracy, etc. And you can Islam take as some other identity, but I don't think that identity politics is the base, on which we can find some way out of this situation. And I am really deeply touched by your belief. But can you understand that I don't share this hope? My own experience, and looking 20 years after the war, and looking these forms of dissolution, the depopulation of these countries, which have, they have no future. Croatian nation has no future. If you look at deindustrialization, etc., the story is over. It will take like 2 generations, but it is more or less over. And I'm very much interested into the perspectives that go beyond, nation, these divisions, because I don't think that in the current crisis of neoliberal capitalism, that some sort of restoration of an order of nation state that will be able to create some social welfare. This is about, it's not about being, strong, proud, and it's about possibility to organize a decent social life within a state. This won't be possible. I'm for sure. And then, speaking just one. I know you don't like numbers, but as my text has the title "Russia is kaput." There are $500 billion Russian assets frozen abroad, which is a huge money. Ukrainians probably believe they will get it, to recover, to rebuild. I don't believe. I don't believe that the financial powers in this world will give this money to the Ukrainians. I think that these banks know much better how to make profits with this money. But anyway, I'm pessimistic. You are optimistic. You are younger. I am older. Being older is not in itself better.
Okay.
What?
Time is on her side.
Time. Well, no. Time is on my side. I will die before the collapse and destruction of global warming. You know, I have a few years left, and I go. And you guys, you will be burned by the sun.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's to other question, but one small comment. This is interesting about your idea of failure of national identity. It's funny because only Ukrainians right now fighting Russians, not Russians fighting inside Russians, no Belarusian fighting inside their own state. Ukrainians, national identity of Ukrainians is fighting right now Russians. So it's just small comment. It's okay. Next question. Who? Yes.
I did not understand the comment. That Russians are fighting Ukrainians. Yes.
Okay, so today, like we heard many definitions of West and East, and also there was a lot of talk about the Russian war against Ukraine in this relation, like how it is, what's the role of the West behind, and you know. But symptomatically enough, I think there was the word or the term imperialism was not mentioned today. And I think it's also not mentioned in your text, Boris, which was also discussed today, which I think is a problematic moment because I think it's more important to talk about not the reactivation of the Cold War or whatever, the fight between West and East taking place today, but we should talk about the conflict of empires and small countries and the peripheries, which had no, which been repressed for many years, had no voice, staying in the shadow, etc., etc. Which is exactly the case of Ukraine, because I mean, I think many of us agree that United States is a modern empire, but Russia is an empire too. The difference is that that actually it's an old type of empire, and in the time when many empires collapsed, I mean, with the end of the First World War, Russia did not. It just changed its face. This is why I also found the conclusion you make in the text about that only revolution in Russia can change this situation and stop the war a bit strange, because we already saw that revolution in 1917 didn't really change the imperialistic character of Russia. It just changed its form. So this is why I think that actually the real changes, they are coming from the periphery, from the smaller countries, which had no chance to and the right to say. And also, I don't think that this war is the result of the failure of the transition period. Of course, it's also the problem of capitalism, but I think the problems lays much deeper in the history, and if not decades, but centuries, and Russian imperialistic policy towards Ukraine. I mean, Ukrainian borders were formed during Soviet Union time not because of the will of Ukrainians, but because of very aggressive acts and decisions which were made in Moscow. So I'm curious about your opinion.
Oh
about
yes, yes, yeah, Lucky. I like the question. Well, I did not mean in my text a Russian revolution, you know, repeating of Russian Russian Revolution. I think in terms of changing the situation, which includes also changing the imperialism of the West, because in the West there are also small countries, not only in the imperial. Ask about how sovereign is, for instance, Croatia within NATO and the West. You might ask, these are, I would say, these are neo-feudal relation in which you have these small nations as vassals. And the real power, for instance, in Croatia, of course, is not parliament, it's American embassy. But I'm just like saying about the reproduction of the relations of dependency that resemble much more feudal systems before the modern world of democratic nation states, etc. So this is my point. Secondly, when it comes to, I would make a huge difference between Lenin and Stalin. I would make difference between Lenin's call for and fight of Bolsheviks against Russian imperialism. I would also make, we talk also in Serbia how Serbian social democrats voted against the war 1914, although Serbia was attacked by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Anyway, when it comes to the fall of imperia, like, after the First World War, it was Austrian-Hungarian Empire. It was Woodrow Wilson who, after the Bolsheviks revolution, came up with these 14 points calling for the self-determination in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. This is the moment when Hungary lost 70% of territory. This is Viktor Orban, until nowadays. Why is Viktor Orban such a freak? Because of Trianon Treaty after the First World War, creating the Balkans, creating all these borders, which are until 100 years later, they are not fixed, and there are wars. And I don't know if you have an idea, if we come up again repeating Woodrow Wilson idea about self-determination of nation in imperial Russia today, shall we get 100 years of war? How many Bosnia, how many Srebrenica, Nagorno-Karabakh, how many minorities on the other side of the border, majorities, minorities, national minorities, how many will be? Is this the solution? Or, and this is my point, when I say revolutionary, how to think of democratic transformation beyond the idea of borders between nations, beyond the idea of majority and minority in cultural relation. If you think of the rights of cultural or linguistic minority, what this would mean? Have you ever thought about rights of Russian-speaking Ukrainians? What sort of minority rights they should have? Or the question is whether the concept of minority rights can deal with this problem. I would say it cannot, and I know precisely on the experience of former Yugoslavia. You can give a minority absolute, almost statehood in terms of minority rights. It won't suffice, So any time when it comes to national liberation, it comes to question of borders. And when it comes to the question of borders, it's minorities, majorities, and I don't know whether it is a good idea to repeat Woodrow Wilson's idea. And he was criticized by the liberals, saying that he did not make difference between the so-called civic nationalism liberal civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. Of course he did not. But these are the consequences. I don't think that the repeating of this paradigm, 100 years old paradigm, will bring democracy, prosperity, peace, etc. Quite the contrary. It will bring another 100 years war. Which we, you know, in the Balkans, we know it precisely. The borders are still questioned 100 years after Woodrow Wilson. Now it is 100 years. So my question is whether we can within this system of sovereign nation states, this cluster of sovereign nation states, whether we within this system can solve these problems. I doubt it. And this is what I mean, that we need revolution. We need first some sort of revolution in our imagination to think about borders, about these relations completely different, in a different way.
Sorry, just a short comment that I also make a big difference between Stalin and Lenin. But, you know, we have to admire that, in fact, Lenin was also imperialist, because we all know only about the results of Bolshevik Revolution, but not so many people know that actually other leftist project of the time, which is a social democratic project, which was in Kiev, or anarchist project of Nestor Makhno, who was also in Ukraine, were brutally smashed by the Bolshevik army. So that is not really a liberating process. But would you agree? So my point is that, and the question, would you agree that the revolution cannot change the empire? The empire can only collapse.
Revolution should not change. It should destroy the empire. However, the question is how, on which terms, with which concepts. And I don't think that Woodrow Wilson's idea about self-determination, national self-determination, is this revolutionary idea. 100 years old.
Because it will lead to balkanization.
Yes, we call it balkanization. Yeah, this is the
100 states, small states fighting each other.
Small states. Ukraine, small states, yes, minority, yes. Let's switch to another question, please.
Yes. So, my name is Hanna Radziejowska. I would like, I was all the time collecting different thoughts that I heard here, and right now I will try to start with one reflection, because there was the moment when you were discussing about Putin, who is he, and how that you dream about killing him. Yes, but the problem, I think, is that we should start from the victim, because and suffering, because my institution, for example, runs the Lemkin Center, and our people in Ukraine, in different places, they collect testimonies on Russian crimes. And I can assure you, today I was listening to one of these people who were held in Kherson in a prison and were tortured, raped, and by miracle, in fact, they not by miracle, but because Ukrainian army liberated, they could tell this story, and there was no Putin there. There were Russians, and these stories which we collected are already thousands, but we know that these stories are thousands and thousands more. And the problem of this whole construction that I was listening, and as a historian, I have many remarks, yes, like, you know, you can say about Wilson, and I understand that revolution and Lenin, but in the end, these stories stopped because there was the Bolshevik, Poland Bolshevik war, and Poland won this war, and it's a little bit, moment, I will jump to that back, but the victim. So, I mean, the story about this word, how you explain the word, is in my, I had this impression that you want to really create that there is this West and East, and what was in this long time ago a very popular sentence that being determines consciousness. And let's start from this, how Ukraine will develop or not will develop, and Belarus. I'm sorry, I'm from Poland. We have already last year, I don't know, 300,000 refugees, political refugees who were these elites of this Belarus, because they were this, in fact, this revolution was based on this, the wealthy people. So why they are escaping? Why the people who, like this soldier whom I was honored to meet in Ukraine, who was fighting, he fights since 2014, and when he was discussing, he was suddenly surprised when we discussed Belarus. He said, but how people can live without freedom? How people, I mean, what is the price of freedom? And we have here these dimensions. I mean, that what we describe as why I think Irina is a very good example of this Ukrainian, not only I think younger generation, but generally this experience of Ukrainian, what Timothy Snyder said many times, that Ukraine brought back future. Because if you choose between values, and there is the word of values, then you have future, because you have choice. And, well, why the war started? The war started because what you call West, many countries in the West, they were dealing with Russia, and they were building this structure of empires which were not about, I mean, we cannot cut this past, and we cannot, I mean, perhaps you don't like these datas, not me, because these datas there are many reasons how it could be possible. And I remember from your book, you had this idea 10 years ago that the past and this love for past replaced in fact that the society cannot improve, develop, and so on. And it's not true. I think right now I think many intellectuals have to face it, that it turned out that why Putin started the war, how he explained the war, how Russia explained the war, because they had this very, I mean, historian propaganda, changing history. It was like how this propaganda works. It's like this I don't know, telling many things that are completely out of this of experience. Because in the end, when I think about victims, when I think about this concrete single person who experienced the suffering and raping and this violence, we understand very well that it's about, first of all, about values which we call freedom, a true meaning of peace, and this war is most of it's about this. And then why it turned out that that in the end this security for nations gives a national state. No, okay, I understand that it must be very disappointing, but well, perhaps this making this you asked who is the West, who takes the decision. I'm sorry, it's very simple also and easy to check it, because there are conferences, there are states, there are complete data who send how much tanks and how much and which countries they don't send. So I mean, this is I understand perhaps people in world of art and cultural remembrance, they don't understand how the political administration works. But it's really something that it can be explained and has, I'm sorry, many data which has reason, conclusion, how it starts, what's going on later, and this is what is this historian work, yes? So, I mean, for me, the problem of West or East it's also not something new, because in my country and our region, also Ukrainian, we had this experience, for example, like Germany and Austria together, like Third Reich, yes, in this time, they had this concept of East, and it's not something new, yes? It doesn't mean that what they described as the West is what is today, but because I think in all these concepts that you were explaining on trying to put Ukraine in this lack of future, I think it's because there are no values in your thinking about this, because everything circulates about money. I'm sorry, it's not about this. People who fight for freedom, they can really sometimes lose everything, and in the end, what really creates history is people who, these individuals who sometimes, like Timothy Snyder says, they have choice because they have values, and that's why they are free, and they know that their future exists. And this is what I wanted for, first of all, say. There are many, I mean, I had many these moments of, like, come on, Hungary and Orban. Yes, I agree. He's very, I mean, this is, for sure history has impact on him, but there are experience of being Austro-Hungary imperium, of course, this is one thing, and they had with Russia and Germany this very political important experience of partition of the Lithuanian-Poland Commonwealth. But I think much more important was what happened after Second World War, not First World War. And it's very interesting why you were mentioning Wilson, and I think it's because it was this moment which was, you know, this disappointment for Russia, imperialism in this form of communism, that these new states were established, could come back on the map. And that's also, I think, there are many things that are historically important to discuss. And, well, I have many here comments, but I'm question. I really wanted
it's
to
clear
comment.
from the comment.
I'm sorry.
And answer is very simple. We agree very much. I don't believe in values. This is very, very simple. I don't believe in an arbitrary definition of features of a certain identity.
But
and
are the victims important for you?
Sorry?
Are the victims important for you?
Wait a minute, this will be another answer. Victims, look, I even wrote, and I can repeat it, there is a huge problem of understanding history from some sort of idea of a courtroom, in which you clearly have victims of one side, perpetrators on another side. This might help, this might pacify our moral feelings, but it will tell us nothing about history. History is not, and especially this moment, is not a time at the end of history, and we are not in the courtroom. And especially, you said people from culture, people. No, thinking people. If it is, you know, like take Bosnia, of course it is completely clear, you know, who was victim and who was perpetrator in Srebrenica. We know it precisely. And it's not question about it. And it's not about values. These are more the simplest values, you know, not to kill innocent people, not to kill babies. But why do nations then, the perpetrators, admire as national heroes? Why it repeats itself? What shall I think about Croatia? About nation which does this? About Serbs? Is it the value of the Serbs? Is it the value of Croatians that they admire the killers of the babies? Do Germans have identity with a value like Auschwitz. I think that history is more complicated, and that while we, of course, you know, I love to see Mladic. I loved to see Milosevic in a court. But how to explain Peter Handke coming to his funeral, and what this means? What was he representing? What sort of Western value? He got Nobel Prize.
Since when is Peter Handke representative of the West?
I don't.
I mean, he's literally someone who despises exactly these concepts.
There are no values which could define what is West. You know, there is no possibility. This is, you know, you have Madeleine Albright asked in this famous, iconic interview, asked whether it was worth the death of 500,000 children in Iraq, the intervention in Iraq. And she says, yes, it was worth. Is this the Western value? Is Iraq Western value? Is Afghanistan Western value? You know, the whole talk about values cannot bring us anywhere. This is my point, and I don't believe in values. You know, if you say freedom, which freedom? Is there something like Western freedom? Ask Palestinians, ask, I don't know. You know, you can ask so many about this. And I really think that the idea of identities defined by what you call values, like you know, our European values as Europeans repeat, and it is precisely what I told. The legal system of nation states in Europe, is this a value of Europe? Well, when they support Ukraine, it looks like it is. But when they put pressure on Serbia to recognize Kosovo, it obviously is not. So we have to deal with these contradictions and start to think from these contradictions and not behave as though they don't exist. And they can be reconciled in some sort of, you know, beautiful, of course. It's cherry picking. You always take the best values. You know, democracy, rule of law, prosperity. Of course it is, these are rationality, the values of the West, for instance.
Okay.
But it is as I'm saying, it's cherry picking. It's totally arbitrary. And when I say that we should, let's take the, you know, what is basic in politics is prima facie to believe that there is no this differentiation between civilization and barbarians. This is the starting point, you know, and this is defined by values, the so-called civilizational difference. And I don't think that West has right to claim any sort of civilizational difference towards the rest. So, yes, we do agree. I don't believe in values, and unfortunately, I don't believe that a personal experience of suffering directly leads to the solution of political problems. It does not. And that reducing history to the simple relation between perpetrators and victims, as though we are in a court, this is wrong. We will be not able to understand what is happening and what will be happening in the future.
So you mean that in Treblinka there were no perpetrators?
Sorry?
In Treblinka there were no perpetrators and victims, yes?
Where in?
Treblinka. Death camp. Treblinka there were no victims and no perpetrators.
We don't understand. I said it is very clear. It is very clear who is perpetrator and who is victim. For
what is the
instance, in Srebrenica.
difference?
I said it is very clear. Of course it's very clear in Auschwitz. Of course it is very clear in Mariupol. It is in Bucha. It is very clear. I'm just saying that reducing history to this simple differentiation is not a good starting point to understand anything.
I understood. Okay,
And
I have
it
a
is not
question.
about
so
recognizing or
understood.
not.
Yes, yes, yes. So let's not go for the round. Leon, I have a question for you. As long as I live here for the couple of years, I have repeatedly hear these narratives through peace movement, mostly. From German peace movement, very much influenced by Russian propaganda, by so-called, as we can say, East Germany. And my question is how you see in Germany, in, let us say, in culture, audience, culture players, which are the roots of such such narratives, and how it comes right now in Germany that these narratives are very much influenced by intellectuals, let us say, yes, here in Germany, and how you see which are the roots of these narratives right now in Germany, especially in correlation of non-working this DDR, Soviet, post-Soviet, post-communistic, communistic, and this kind of narratives. Thank you.
You mean you mean people that ask for peace in a way of saying it's only a question of decision making by, for example, it's now Ukraine, they can only make...
Yes, 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 like no subjectivity, there's players, there is some global West, there is no this value. So how you see it in Germany from, I don't know, for this last 30 years, how it was developed and what is the roots of that? Thank you.
So first of all, there's one thing that I actually also wanted to say before, was the not dealing of the East part. That's not actually true. There was actually a lot of dealing with it, and it was also often being used to create this narrative of the two regimes, right, like National Socialism and GDR, to actually belittle the Holocaust. This is a debate that we have a lot until today. There are like several memorial places that have like a somehow double history. They were like special prisons during the GDR times, and now you have AfD, let's say, some sympathizers running these places and having... And there were also camps before, concentration camps, not death camps. And then they're running these exhibitions where they, for example, stress the point of the GDR times rather than this other. So there's a lot of dealing with it, there's a lot of instrumentalization of it, and so on and so forth. The other thing was the peace movement in itself. It has, in Germany... I mean, I can only speculate about it because actually it comes in different times and in different contexts, but there was a term that was more prominent when I was a bit younger. It was called national pacifism. And this is a term that came back now. During the Ukraine war, I heard it again. And I was wondering where it was for a long time. And somehow in Germany, people the idea of pacifism in Germany, I think, has a lot to do with their own past. And it has also to do with not dealing with their past. And I think this is also what I tried to say before when I quoted your text, because you said that supporting Ukraine actually helps Germany to deal with their past. And my personal impression is that it's actually the other way around. That actually, as Paul Spiegel said it in 2001 or 2002, that in Germany there is a tendency, he said, behind the cries for peace, the murders are waiting. So Germany people often used to deflect. That's why I'm also a bit always with this criticism of the West. I always know it from the other side, so I'm having issues with this, that people were always in Germany making this point of Western war crimes, Western aggression, Western whatsoever, feeling not sovereign during, not sovereign because they feel like also, as you said, vasallen state of the West, West Germany being not sovereign still because ruled somehow from America, NATO, sometimes Israel, when they talk about how they feel they have to deal with their past. And there, the East Germany plays a very. I'm coming back to this peace thing. There, East Germany plays a very interesting past because the way that has been dealt in the East was in East Germany, specifically in East Germany, not the East, specifically in the GDR, with their own historical past as a part of National Socialism, was an idea of universalization of responsibility, of guilt, of whatever. So in the end, somehow they managed to create this idea that the Holocaust is an event that is part of many events of violence, of colonialism, and so on and so forth. The way they argued this was, of course, always to focus more on other events and to create this kind of relative, how do you say, like, somehow like, again, belittle the element of the Holocaust, and especially somehow make its ideological development, how it got there, how it developed, somehow make this disappear. In the GDR, I said before already, by switching the ideology of the National Socialism in its opposite almost, they somehow also made the ideological elements completely disappear. This is something that is attractive now again in some aspects, and when you see now all these peace demonstrations or these peace movements, they're not really asking for peace when they are going on a demonstration with a Russian flag. You don't go to demonstrate for peace and then you wave a flag of Russia. You don't go to also before. I mean, these like peace demonstrations, they always come up again. These like Montagsmahnwachen, they were always, of course, they were waving this like peace dove or peace Friedenstaube, but also often the Russian flag. And of course, it is an expression of a felt dependence on the West. And there, this idea of sovereignty, I think it's different than in the case of Ukraine right now, but there it becomes very, very dangerous, and it has a strong tradition in the German nation building, actually, which was always an idea also to like create sovereignty from others. And this is also what I would say what we witness at this peace rallies, and why they are often supporting Russia is because they see something there that simulates for them an idea of sovereignty from the West. So they are not really peace protests. They are actually in a certain way thinking that they are a movement of emancipation from some certain ideas. And there, of course, we can say there are no values. There are no values this, there are no values that. But in the end, what we see in these peace movements is that they feel threatened by certain ideas of values, that they feel threatened by the by responsibility for their own historical past, by how to deal with it. So I can understand how we can think that many things that are connected with the West are cynical, double standards, and so on and so forth. But in the end, even the Peter Handke, I totally agree, it's disgusting. I think he didn't even he didn't only attend the funeral. I think he even gave a speech at the funeral, if I remember correctly. But I think also Noam Chomsky went into this direction. And both are not necessarily people that have anything to me in common with West, especially not Noam Chomsky. They are strong criticizers of the West. So here they are in a certain way criticizing double standards and values, but they're replacing it with others, with other values. And they also have an idea of freedom. It's just a different idea of freedom. And I think this goes a lot to cultural questions, or and this is maybe how I could answer it. I mean, we can also talk about who are the people who go there, who develop these, who hijack freedom movements and so on and so forth. Why is it all the players from the identitarian movements and so on and so forth? But I would say this is somehow how I maybe could make most sense of the question, and why this is absolutely not a peace movement, and how also the way that in the GDR peace was explained was never really about peace. I mean, so what you say about the West, it goes somehow vice versa in a certain way, and maybe in Den Haag. We can say, yes, Bush was not in Den Haag. Can say that.
Just to, of course, it's ambivalent. The last minister, chief of staff of Yugoslav army, who was responsible for Vukovar, this is Mariupol. He was educated in United States, in Kansas. And died in Russia. So things are complicated. It's not that simple that West is good and I don't know, the rest is bad. West consists of good values and the rest consists of bad values. This is, since we are not on the front line and we have now to immediately choose, either you are for or against, we can use this beautiful opportunity to start to think, to reflect upon it, and the reflection starts when there is more than a simple relation between good and bad, between perpetrators and victims, and it's not about, and it's especially I must repeat, I remember it for so many years, that this discourse that concentrates on victims and perpetrators always reproduces some sort of moralist blackmailing, but while the situation is mostly very clear, the political solutions have not been found.
But one second.
What is not acceptable?
I got just one question. I just think there's one. Maybe what is for me most interesting is this: the West, the idea of the West, always will be, rightfully so, judged by its own claim. Like we claim, there's a certain claim, the values that you say are non-existent or are just hollow phrases, just as the East were, like solidarity and is also hollow phrases and meant nothing, literally nothing. Also on a political level, it meant nothing. But it will be judged by this. But this idea of the East will not be judged by this. So this is the thing to be like, somehow my impression is that when we criticize the West, we do it because it's logical in its own framework or in its own idea, if it exists, like, or if it's just an idea, because it has the idea of having this criticism in, like, as one of its core elements. So this makes sense. But if we say, but this also leads to the fact that somehow always only the West seems to have an intention, whereas something that is the East somehow has no intention. And it's somehow, it applies. When I was a child, when I was young, you know, everyone, because in East Berlin, everyone was talking like this. America is shit because they pretend to be nice, friendly, blah, 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 blah. Russia is cool because they are unfriendly and tough and so on, and that's authentic. They don't pretend to be something they are not. It's really like how we talk with each other. I said the same bullshit. And so somehow I have the impression that these very simple, almost gut feelings, they sneak into our way of judging these conflicts. So that one thing has an intention and tries to sell us something, and the other thing somehow doesn't. This is somehow a thing that I sometimes experience when I talk to people. It's it's one of the impressions, and it's also a little bit what we see when we listen to people like Sarah Wagenknecht on television, or to all kind of people who are now defending it, or trying all kind of ways to defending Russia, or defending an idea of Russia that doesn't exist anymore, something like this.
Well, to repeat, my point is this differentiation, the West and the rest. This is quite old differentiation, and this construction of the West as a normative identity block, which we constantly subjectivize it. We think the West, but we don't know who is it. So what is it? What is how it can be a subject? But anyway, we use it, and my point is that this limits our understanding of the situation. This limits the possibility to try to find some solution to the problem. But I did not understand what did you say about Holocaust? Sorry, you mentioned something. Yeah, about Holocaust. You mentioned something about Holocaust.
Yes, because you were saying about that concept of victims and perpetrators then goes to blackmail each other, and I'm saying that this is very direct stressing the Holocaust.
No, I didn't say that.
No, you
because
said
this is such a nonsense. I cannot say that the concept of victims and contradict each other. I did. Sorry.
Perhaps you didn't intend, but in the end, I would say that the problem of when we say that it's very dangerous because it will blackmail and it will build this moral concept and blah blah blah. In the end, yes, after Holocaust, we had many people in democracies. People are people, that's obvious. There are people who are hypocrite. There are people who say something and do something different. But perspective of victim has changed. This, it was huge effort that we stand on the side of killed Jews, and it's like this is the very good and proper message after Holocaust. I'm saying not about. I'm saying about this experience, what happened during Second World War, and when we say that it's too much that we see perpetrator and victim and we blackmail because it's dangerous, this moral feeling better or something that someone is victim. Come on, it's really. When we come back to the victim.
What? This is precisely what you are now doing. You are blackmailing morally my claim that history cannot be, in our understanding, reduced to the simple relation between perpetrators and victims. And that the perspective of victims can be good for many, many things, for commemoration, for building huge memory places like in Srebrenica, like in Auschwitz, can be very useful to organize something in Germany in terms of Gedächtniskultur based on the concept of communicative rationality, etc. This is, and what I said, Hague Tribunal is a huge archive precisely of this, of the testimonies of the victims. But why? Why there was Auschwitz? Why there was Srebrenica? Why there is a Mariupol? What are the forces that have brought this concrete perpetrators to do this?
Imperialism.
Sorry?
Imperialism.
I did not say this. Do you?
No,
if you like, yes, yes, I know. Yes, probably those in Iraq who blame United States for 500,000 children deaths. Probably they also say imperialism. What sort of imperialism? Is this old sort of imperialism? A new one? I don't know. It is, you know, when you say imperialism, this is like Nazis. This is precisely in Russian when they, you know, say how many Nazis they killed in Ukraine, you know, because they are Nazis. Russians.
Okay, let's give the chance to another.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, I think, okay. I have to take this back to a completely different point, so sorry to interrupt it. I want to jump back right to the beginning where you talked about data. You accused us of not liking data. I very much like data. I'm an economist and statistician. And a lot of this, you presented us with this huge construct which kind of delved into different realms, different part of geopolitical agreements and everything. But it seemed to me, and I have to admit I'm not Ukrainian and I haven't read anything about you or of your work, so perhaps this is out of ignorance. You started this off with saying something like, you cited a few data points and said something about the failing of Ukraine in terms of translation or transitioning in economic terms. I would just like to know where this data comes from. What is your source? Because it seems to me that this is like a huge, like the way, this negativism, or let's say rather pessimism, of this hugely significant conclusion that you stated here is the foundation, seems to me, to all these arguments that you later presented. And for me as an economist and statistician, as I said again, these conclusions seems to me a little bit overblown. You already defended yourself by saying that you're a kind of pessimist about this. But this is all the more interesting to me where the sources come from. Plus, me personally, thank you. I only just Googled the claim about GDP and something was not right about it, especially the nominal GDP. You said something about Ukraine is still recovering and has not, or is yet to reach 1985 levels. I have just Googled it, World Bank data, it was not correct. So it's very interesting to me to listen to the source or have a citation here. Thank you.
Statistics of World Bank. I have it here. So I don't have time, but quite a lot statistic data. This is one source. Another source is Branko Milanovic. His works on global equality. So it is. I can start. You know. I have about Moldova, Kosovo, very concrete data, statistics of the World Bank.
It seemed to me a little bit, the whole argumentation to come to this hugely important conclusion was a little bit lacking to me, especially if you're just looking at GDP, which is, between economists, not really a metric for anything.
Well,
look at human development indexes, other things.
I don't think I don't think so. We might, on an ideological level, discuss the problem of measuring growth, you know, by GDP, but on a very ideological level. But when it comes to the statistical data and the use of statistical data, then it is still a measure.
I don't want to get too combative about this, but as a newly emerging economist and statistician myself, I have to completely disagree here at this point, because if we would measure everything by GDP and take conclusions from that, we would have a similar pessimistic opinion about some countries that we wouldn't expect it from, or that we would kind of see as, well, figures that we orient ourselves to. So, just at this point, just a comment, maybe if you want to make this argument, you should look a little bit broader and consult.
You know.
Because you're making a hugely important statement, this is what I'm saying. This is, I don't know.
Yes.
You said you don't really care about values, but I kind of care about, I care about truth and scientific integrity.
Yeah.
So, at this point, just this comment. As I said, I haven't read your other works. Perhaps you have elaborated there.
No, I didn't. But there are works. I can give you names, but of course these are here very concrete data, World Bank data. And the point, which I think is very important, for Branko Milanovic, because he uses this data to deal with the problem of global inequality. And this is why these data matter.
I'm not arguing about necessarily the data, but the interpretation.
Yeah.
The World Bank will give data and will give interpretations, and they're oriented to certain methods. And
you are probably feel touched by the fact that Ukraine is actually, according to this data, absolute loser of transition.
Not at all. I have actually nothing to do with Ukraine itself, but I have worked in comparative economic analysis for now 4 years, so I care about the integrity of this topic itself.
Yes.
So I actually want to stop this here because it will get too confrontative.
Yeah.
This was just a
Yes. But you know the name of Branko Milanovic, so you can check it very, very easily.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. We spent 3 hours, and I was thinking during that time how to bring it into not that depressive vector. So I came up finally.
Can I still just one thing?
Yeah.
Because I also had this thought about data, and I had this thought all the time, because you build your view of the world on data, and according to statistics, like Russians marched on Hreshtatyk a year ago, so data can be wrong. This is the first thing. And the second of all, if you say that personal experience is not important at all, what would be the history of Holocaust without personal experience? It would be only the data in German archives. So
these data are from 13. So there are before some of them. Other are from. Are you listening to me? Are you listening to me? Yeah. So first, these data are from one part of before the First War, another data before the Second War, and why do you say that I claim that personal experience is not important? This is precisely how I started. I started with claiming that it is my personal experience with the Yugoslav war, which is the starting point of my reflection on this, which is explicitly claimed. This is one thing.
You comment after I ask you if you were in Belarus ever.
Look, about Belarus, I was using data. And this is what was the point. I was saying one very clear thing, that it is a dictatorship. Why should you mean I should come and experience, it is dictatorship. My point was that economic prosperity and dictatorship are not necessarily contradiction. This is my point. And I don't have to go to a jail in Belarus to get confirmation of this.
No, I was in Belarus in 2004, and I was in Ukraine in 2004 during Orange Revolution, and believe me that a statement that Belarus is much more successful than Ukraine is, to me, like mildly talking about it like an overstatement.
Well, but then, you know, we don't need data. We don't need economic measures to understand the world. It's like just people should travel and collect experience. And something else, I said also that the Hague Tribunal is extremely important precisely because it is a huge archive of personal experience of victimhood, and that you can reconstruct completely this war on the ground of this data. And this is the most important element, and why I, you know, this is the reason why I support the idea of Hague Tribunal without having any illusions about its political use.
But can you imagine like what would happen if there was no Nuremberg? Like, can you imagine that maybe there is a world in which there would be like hundreds of Mariupols if there was no prosecution of German perpetrators?
I'm just like saying I would love to see them, but don't expect political solution. I would love to see Putin, as I liked to see Milosevic, but I did not like Peter Handke on his funeral, attending his funeral.
Sorry, can I comment? I think the problem is that some levels of reality are mixed in this question about the personal experience. Of course, you can understand how it is to live in Belarus, but you cannot understand the global economical system of inequality only judging from your personal experience. But so if you never said it, then I don't understand your question. Yes, statistics can tell us about some things. Personal experience can tell us about some other things. So that's the. Yes, 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 of course, yeah.
Okay, I think that it's time to finish, and I want to ask the last question to bring it into more positive vector. And my question is more to you. Have you seen in last year and a half, or can you foresee some positive changes in local discussions or some topics that are coming up, thankfully, to the war that is happening in German society?
If I can, I wish I could.
Not positive.
If I can foresee a positive change in discussions due to the war,
it started any kind of discussion or problematic, you know, discussion problematic historical points, maybe some topics that Ukraine could bring, and maybe some kind of changes could happen in understanding the ways, you know, if it was happening.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, from this I can for sure say it's not only Ukraine, also Iran, I would say. I mean, if I think about it, I mean, it's the stuff that I'm interested in, and then I see that Ukraine, it's positive and it's negative. I mean, it clarified a lot of things. It clarified also a lot of political positions, I think. It brings a certain clarification in the political debates, but it's not necessarily all only for the good. You see how parties develop. You see how things that were more under the rug are being said more openly. The debates shift, and I think it brings clarity for some things. So I like this clarity, but it's not necessarily what I like to see. For sure not. I mean, in a sense, AfD profits here. you know. And the Grüne Partei, for example, which we somehow need, also you said we will all burn from the sun before. If there is a certain connection, I think, in like in a more popular debate about the whole thing, but in the end, this is where the votes also come from. There is a connection between the position of, for example, the Green Party and all the other things that they are standing for, you know, climate change and so on. So in a certain way, there I am very pessimistic. I'm not sure how long they will last, for example, politically. And I think that this is, sorry, because it's not a positive, an optimistic. I like to be an optimist, and usually I am, but in this thing I am also a bit pessimistic. But what somehow, for many claims that I tried to make, so a lot of things now they prove themselves, and I think, but this doesn't really help me in a certain way. It's actually more, it's a very small win in a bigger war. So this, yeah.
Thank you so much for participating in discussion. And
you didn't ask me to
what?
say what, but anyway,
what? Sorry?
You didn't ask me about the last word to say.
Because I wanted to ask.
So I was just like waiting to see, just to repeat from the beginning, from the opening, the one according to my experience, people can't reconcile very easily, very fast. However, there must be a political solution to the problem, and I'm very, very pessimistic. And as I wrote in my text, I only hope that Ukraine wins. However, I'm very, very skeptical about it, and I don't trust what people call West. I don't trust the West in this relation. So, in these terms, I'm very, very pessimistic. Very pessimistic, and to my opinion, the old system is crumbling before our eyes, and it will be not recovered. We are in a sort of interregnum generally, and this is why I think that we must start to think radically about different forms of organizing society, politics, beyond the constraints of this geopolitical, construction today, which means also that the legal system, old legal system, is dead. The legality of the international order.
Can I one comment to this? It's not that I absolutely trust everything, like the West in its total also, like we could talk about memorial culture and so on. It's not that I'm totally trusting it with my own experiences. I can also talk there about experiences. But what I know for sure is when the West breaks away, when the West, let's say when the West in America breaks away and we have another Putin, another Trump time, then it will be very, very difficult for Ukraine. So I'm very much hoping, even though I'm not trusting with everything in the West, but I'm much more trusting it than every alternative I've ever actually seen. And I would say in a hot war for Ukraine, what comes afterwards is another thing, but this would be a disaster. If that's my opinion, if we wouldn't do everything in our power to keep this thing with the West for a while, alive for a while. That's my position towards it.
I can only, this is not a solution, because there is a world beyond West, and this is my starting and ending, and the end, starting point and the end. So.
But it's new that Ukraine is West. It was also always.
No, I don't think in these terms. I don't think in these terms. I don't really think in terms of belonging or not belonging. For me, the West is a social relation. It is not a place, it's not a territory, it is an identity. It's an ahistorical identity, and this is the huge problem. As I'm saying, I don't believe in the West, and I don't think the West is a solution, and I think that in our understanding and our hopes to come out of this deadlock, the West is not the direction. The whole transition was based on this direction, and it has failed.
What would be a solution?
Sorry? What would be
Is this working? You mentioned earlier that you were interested in other after-nation scenarios of development of the world. Do you see a solution there?
This would be, this is not about, I'm not a Dugin, to dream about the different geopolitical constructions, how some Northwest should be against or BRICS or something. It is not about these fantasies, which are pathological fantasies. The whole geopolitics is ideological itself. This is the way how we see the world. The map is ideological, how we see the world. And the concepts of the East, as you probably know, it's epistemological construction from the so-called area studies. This is how notions of Eastern Europe, of Middle East were created. Not because they were existing, but they are constructions of a certain discipline, of a certain epistemology, and we know precisely when and where. So, but what would be a possible solution? I mentioned that I deal with the concept of translation as a concept of universality. Of course, I don't have time now to explain it, but it is about relation and dealing with differences beyond the concept of minorities and majorities within constructions, entities like societies, nation states, etc., which means beyond the existing concept of nation-state democracy and towards the global world of equality, beyond the divisions on the normative identity blocks like the West or, I don't know, the BRICS world or etc.
So it means that you will persuade Russians not to be Russians?
The question is, of course, me,
No, because you're out of national identity.
I'm not in position, to come to Moscow and tell Putin stop the war in Ukraine.
And who will do
I'm
it?
not, I cannot imagine myself talking to how many millions Russians that they will, So the question is very mean, but it wants me, to identify myself in terms of representation, that there are Russians and they can be represented by, I don't know, by an address. I do address Russians. Just imagine, what is the logic of your question? How did you create this sort of mode of addressing?
Because Russians are going with the Russians and killing like Russians other nations. I am contradicting your failure idea of national states. Russians claiming they're Russians, going and killing other nations. So I'm asking you, if there is a concept with no national states, no nationality, how we will all go to Moscow and persuade Russians not to kill other nations for centuries, for example? What is the idea of that? Physical implementation.
As I'm saying, you expect too much of me, Too much, you expect of me to solve the problem, to save Ukraine, crush Russian imperialism. I cannot do it. But I have just started to open certain questions for which I think would probably give us idea about possible solution. And I'm repeating, I don't think that return to the concept of nation state is a solution to this problem, because the world of nation states is a hierarchical. And as I said, today they are in the relation of neo-feudal dependencies of vassal states, like within the European Union, if you like, you know, between those who have power and those who don't have power, but also globally. And I really don't think that in the world of neoliberal capitalism, in which not a single state can be economically sovereign, is this clear? Is this clear? Not a United States is sovereign economically. The idea of a nation state and sovereignty is the moment of limit of our understanding of the world.
I just wanted to comment. First of all, I absolutely don't understand why it's actually in any interest that a state is financially independent or sovereign. I will never, this is absolutely not to this. I cannot even wrap my head around it. But I just wanted to give another example, because you said before you don't believe in this West thing and so on. It was not my intention to talk about East and West all the time, but somehow we got there. But
It's very simple.
Yeah, but let me give you one example, because I said before, because before Jews had the state, or after they had, but before Israel was in existence, in Germany there was always a kind of Richard Wagner, for example, he wrote. He had also very anti-Western sentiment. Of course, it's a diffuse. It's not a specific, how you would say it, like it's how we would maybe define West as a specific idea of a state or whatever, but it's really like a very diffuse kind of worldview. And his idea was that the Jews can have the same salvation as the Germans will have if they stop being Jewish. And what he was thinking, in the terms he was thinking, Jews represented everything that he saw as something that we would call maybe now Western. So in the end, this whole idea of not having nation states and so on and so forth, I think it's a wonderful idea, but from my personal biographical experience, it never went very well. And now, of course, there is a Jewish state, and it creates a whole new kind of problems. So like the idea of the universalism of the Jews, and now we have the particularist problems that come with the nation state and so on. But from a practical way, always when I think about it, I come to very dark conclusions.
Of course you come to a very dark conclusions, because it's reality.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
describe precisely the reality. If a nation state is not economically sovereign, it cannot guarantee welfare, social welfare. This is the problem. So how shall we have social welfare in a neoliberal world?
So is Germany financially sovereign?
Well, Germany's, look, in Croatia, they did now a research who is helping whom. Germany, Croatia within the European Union, or Croatia, Germany. Since the most educated people go to Germany, it is a fact that Croatia has been helping financially Germany by importing well-educated labor force. So this is one example, so that you have social free education in Croatia, but who actually gets, who uses it?
I understand, it's not measurable.
It's Germany.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is the same. This is the same, and this should be also said about migration. I haven't mentioned this. I haven't mentioned this problem about migration. Not only within the European Union, not only the fact that Ukraine is now, even if it wins, is exposed to migration, that Ukrainians are doomed to become migrants. and that this is the part of the problem and solution at the same time, you know. And then, as I'm saying, the relations of independency and power and hierarchies are there. They are within the European Union. And the European Union is not, you know, a wonderful system of equality.
Nobody says that.
You know.
Look, but nobody says that.
Yeah.
Nobody claims this here. But yeah, I mean, I didn't at least.
Thank you very much. I think,
thank
Lera, you can make the last
No, I was trying to get it into more positive direction, but I don't think that's gonna happen. And yeah, I just want to say thank you very much for discussion, and I want to say thank you very much for agreeing into participating, because that was pretty obvious that it's gonna be hot discussion. So that was brave, and thank you for your point of view, because you're representative of the West, I would say, for Ukraine. But it's also
I was
very
born
relative.
in the East, by the way.
Yeah, but it's, you know, it's different perspective.
I was not born in this.
Lucky you.
No. I was exposed to the market much earlier, and I was precarious within socialism.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you so much, and I wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you for coming and for the questions.
Thank you.